Welcome to a special edition of Boxing Info. I'm your host, The Islander. This date in boxing history, November the 12th, 1982, the setting, Miami's Orange Bowl, Miami, Florida, and a bout between defending WBA junior welterweight champion Aaron the Hawk Pryor from Cincinnati and three-time three-division world WBC lightweight champion or three-division world champion, basically current WBC lightweight champion Alexis Arguello, once again in the Orange Bowl. And the reason why I'm doing this is I've been watching a lot of fights back over and over and over again. And this fight, for the reasons I will tell you, has been haunting me for the past 30 plus years. And it's for different reasons. And there's a lot of significance in this fight because it goes back to a bygone day where the champions fought the champions. The best fought the best. It wasn't about money. It was about history and it was about prestige. And in this fight, I need to back up and give you the... we all know what happened. Aaron Pryor scored the watermark win of his career. And a little bit of background on that, or a little bit of foreground, I should say, on this, is that in hindsight, everybody knew at the time of the fight that Alexis Arguello was probably one of the top 50 pound-for-pound boxers of all time. What has since happened, at least in my mind, if not everybody else out there, is that upon very in-depth study and scrutiny, that Aaron Pryor is probably the most underrated world champion, if one of the world champions of all time, and fits in that top 50 category as well. And let me explain to you a little bit of background, because this was happening about 2 years after I started getting into boxing and watching it on a regular basis. And the person, as all of you know who've watched me for a long time know, got me into boxing was, my dad, who's been gone since 2011. We only had one TV in the house on Long Island, and on Saturday afternoons, some fight here or there was always on the TV, and that's when I settled into this capturing my attention. Well, the one thing I will tell you about my dad is that he was a major Alexis Arguello fan. And something about when your parents like something so much gets you to basically not like that thing so much. So when as 1981 started rounding itself out, I remember I didn't watch the whole thing, but I've watched it back in full. My dad had on the TV one June, approaching my birthday, 1 June Saturday afternoon, and this guy, I never heard of him before, Alexis Arguello, was fighting Jim Watt in London. And Watt basically did all he could do to survive the fight. It didn't look like anything really super impressive to me when I was watching Arguello kind of follow him around the ring and bloody his nose, knocked him down in the 7th round, and won a unanimous decision going away. But my attention really came to a point on October 3rd of 1981 when Alexis Arguello took on Ray Mancini. Now understand that Mancini was from Ohio. His story had been told around and around, so when Arguello beat him, I was not too happy. And thus we fast forward a year to November 12th, 1982. We had had cable TV and had Showtime, I think, for some reason, when we were, first moved to Suffolk County, back about 3 years before this, from Nassau County. And on Friday, November the 12th, 1982, I think it was Cablevision was the name of the cable company, my father had ordered HBO just for this fight. This fight was shown live on HBO. Today, this would have been a massive pay-per-view of epic proportions if this fight took place today with the stature of these two back in 1982. So, needless to say, this was a very big deal in my household. I think even my mother stayed up to watch this. Again, a Friday night. And the idea amongst most boxing journalists at this time was that this fight was going to go most of the way most of Alexis Arguello's fights went. He might get off to a slow start. He'd eventually find the range. And most people felt he was going to knock Aaron Pryor out. As a 12-year-old, I kind of was worried the same thing was going to happen, even though at the time I wanted Aaron Pryor to win this fight, much to the chagrin of my dad, because the odds makers had Alexis Arguello, the challenger, a 2-1 favorite over Aaron Pryor, to the best of my knowledge, in this fight. The fight was so big that they had it staged in the Orange Bowl. I'm trying to figure out, because I don't remember now, in order for them to get that football stadium in set up for boxing, the Miami Dolphins had to have been gone on 2 weeks straight, basically, of not playing there. Because no way it could have been cleaned up in 48 hours and had it ready for a Sunday football game after the fight took place on Friday night. And I don't think they could have got that place ready from the Sunday before, after a football game was played, got it set up with the ring and all the seats that had to be moved. I just cannot see. And what people don't realize, special lighting had to be put in there. They couldn't use just the stadium lights. And I tried to find out what the live gate was as far as the attendance. I think it was somewhere between 25 and 30,000 people showed up to see the fight. And let me be very specific about why this fight is so important, and I'll get into why it haunts me. Because the situation is, Alexis Arguello, when he beat Jim Watt, it was only a month removed from when Wilfred Benitez had moved up to junior middleweight and knocked out Maurice Hope in 12 rounds a year earlier. At that time, I think that they were only the 5th and 6th boxers ever to win world titles in 3 different weight divisions. That was back when there weren't 17 weight divisions. There was more than 8, obviously, but there were not 17, and there was only the WBA and WBC champion. Marvin Hagler at the time was the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. Michael Spinks was about to unify a year later with Dwight Braxton, Muhammad Qawi. So there weren't this flood of world champions, and truth be known, Alexis Arguello could have made history by moving up and challenging the WBC champion in Aaron Pryor's division, who was Saul Manby at the time. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if Manby had lost his title before that, because sometime in 1982 he had lost to Leroy Haley. But either way, Arguello would have been an even bigger favorite over the WBC champion at the time. So only at that time 6 or 7 people had ever won world titles in 3 different weight classes. Arguello was trying to be the first 4-division champion, and only the second person to attempt it, because Henry Armstrong, who most of you who know anything about boxing history know, held the featherweight, the lightweight, and the welterweight, or the featherweight, the welterweight, and the lightweight title in that order, all at the same time. He moved up to take on middleweight champion Seferino Garcia, and basically was held to a 10-round draw where most people thought Armstrong won the fight. Excuse me. In any event, this was a super duper big deal, this fight. And the reason why I take so much time to explain this to you and do this video about this is because, unlike today, and when I say today, I mean the past 25 years for that matter, or the past 20 years, when a fight is billed as a super fight, a pay-per-view, a champion fighting champion, almost every time our expectations are, like with Mayweather and Pacquiao, that it's going to be the super fight of the century. And we're always disappointed. So with this said, this was a really big deal as far as boxing history was concerned. And when these two stepped in the ring, and they did what they did, it met and exceeded expectations. At this time in boxing history, the only thing that kept it classified as the golden age of boxing, which people like my dad and the older generations always said the 1950s were, because the same thing happened in the 1950s. The best would fight the best, and the action in this fight was the same as almost every fight in the 1950s. But the truth be told, fighters didn't fight as often. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Alexis Arguello, I told you, won the WBC lightweight title in June of 1981. June of 1981, 3.5 months later, on October 3rd of 1981, is when he took on and defended the title the first time against the aforementioned Ray Boom Boom Mancini. Okay? On November 21st, which was only 6 weeks later, he's in Las Vegas fighting Roberto Elizondo, another tough fighter. Okay? And then basically we skip ahead to February, which is what? December, January. Another 90 days. He's in Texas defending his title against James Bubba Buscemi. And from February, another 90 days later, in mid-May, the fight had to be postponed, but it was for 2 weeks because Arguello had like a either an infection or a some type of bad cold or something. He defended the title for the last time against Andy Ganigan. And then two months later, in July of '82, he was taking on Kevin Rooney. And then this fight, which was 4 months in the making between those two. So to give you an idea, that's how often, from basically June of 1981, in less than 18 months, he had defended the WBC lightweight title 4 times in 15-round scheduled fights, won and defended the title 4 times, and moved up in weight to challenge the number one 140-pounder possibly in history. Okay. Aaron Pryor, on the other hand, a little bit of background, had basically from that same time, the end of June 1981, he won a blowout 2-round knockout, less than 2-round knockout over Lennox Blackmore. That's the first time I ever saw Aaron Pryor fight. 5 months later, in Cleveland, Ohio, he took on Duwan Johnson, a fight he got knocked down, and it was a brutal fight. Skip ahead 4 months later, he's fighting every 4 months now. Miguel Montilla, a 12-round TKO. And skip ahead another 4 months to July, and he's fighting Akio Kamita. So basically, in that same time span, from June of 1981, he's fighting 4 times before fighting one of the top 50 pound-for-pound fighters of all time. All right, so that gives you an idea of how active these guys were. As I mentioned, Arguello's a 2-1 favorite, and they get into the ring, and basically, as scripted, Pryor comes right after Arguello. One of the things I want to make note, because it's been analyzed and dissected and bisected and trisected a million times of why the blame is that Arguello lost the fight, the charge that Pryor and Panama Lewis were cheating. As I've watched this fight probably close to 100 times now, from start to finish, not once did there are things that I notice now as a grown adult that I didn't notice back then. And mark my words, I wanted Aaron Pryor to win this fight. In retrospect, since then, I've thought to myself, why, if anybody deserved to make boxing history, it was Alexis Arguello, and why couldn't he have done it? And in my past videos, I've told you that there's this invisible line of demarcation, genetic line of demarcation. 135 pounds was the line of demarcation for Alexis Arguello. And one thing I didn't notice on Fight Night, but I've noticed it in recent years, and I tried telling my dad about this before he passed away, was that if you really look at the video, and there's people who have posted on YouTube the whole entire fight with the HBO call back when they were actually calling fights correctly, with Larry Merchant and Barry Tompkins and Sugar Ray Leonard, is that you could tell that Aaron Pryor's legs were a lot bigger than Alexis Arguello. His arms and shoulders were a lot bigger than Alexis Arguello. Even his head was bigger than Alexis Arguello. Now, Alexis Arguello was taller than Aaron Pryor, had a slightly longer reach. But if you stood Aaron Pryor with his chest expanded, you could probably hide 1.5 Alexis Arguellos behind him. And this wasn't something we noticed when the fight was being made and when the fight actually happened. But, as I said, the first bell, this fight over-delivered as far as fight fans are concerned. Pryor rushed Arguello, made him fight at a frantic pace right from the get-go. And they both rocked each other in the first round. Pryor was in Arguello's face for the first 3 to 4 or 5 rounds, even opened up a nasty cut along Arguello's left eye. If you watch Legendary Nights, you'll hear Alexis Arguello Jr. say, he's sitting there for 7 rounds watching his dad get his ass kicked, wondering what the hell is going on. Most of us watching this at home and the boxing experts worldwide thought, this is fine. This is a 15-round fight. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And sure enough, after about 4 or 5 rounds, when Pryor figured out he couldn't get Arguello out of there, he started going to his bicycle. I take that back. That's a wrong term to use. He started moving, and he started giving lateral movement. Not running, not, basically fleeing the scene, but punching and circling and moving and boxing for the first time, working behind the jab, working behind the lead right hand in a jab. Basically, he started changing his style, showing how he could box. And little by little, Arguello started getting the timing down about the 7th round and started landing his shots. Now, truth be known, and as I get to the 13th round, I'll tell you what my dad said when that happened. Pryor knew not to get caught running into any of Arguello's punches, and if he was going to get hit with any of Arguello's punches, it was better to be on the end of them while he was turning his head. And one thing I will say, because I think Aaron Pryor fought the absolute perfect fight that night. That was his watershed moment that I don't think anybody, maybe Sugar Ray Leonard would have beaten him, but very difficult to beat him on that night. And I will say this, as the fight started to turn back even and started to turn into Arguello's favor, is that Arguello, for all of his excellent skill and his excellent championship pedigree, sometimes when you're too perfect, and I say this with the fact that he got massive leverage on his punches and everything was very straight. It was straight from inside his shoulders. He never punched from outside his shoulders in. It was always from his shoulders in straight channels, jab, right hand. Even left hooks were basically started from like his shoulder inward. And Pryor studied this because one of the things when they were on the inside, in order to punch straight like this, it's very easy to defend with a wall of defense against straight punches. What I'm trying to say is straighter is better when you're on the outside. But on the inside, and there was many moments, hundreds of moments in this fight where a guy like Sugar Ray Leonard or Donald Curry or Bobby Joe Young, for instance, or I'm thinking Marvin Hagler or Ray Mancini, when Pryor was up close and not punching, that somebody who could punch from the outside wide should have invested in a lot more body work. Arguello did go to the body, but not near enough, and not near the punches that he scored to the body with did not have the same effect as, say, Sugar Ray Leonard's body punching on Tommy Hearns or Marvin Hagler's body punching or Ray Mancini's body punching, because the shots that Arguello scored with were too straight. Yeah, they landed, but they were not landing with the thudding force of a wider body shot. And, some of you will argue with me about this. It's almost painful to watch this because I see openings, and again, I'm watching it from a TV or from YouTube. I see punches that are there that just weren't there. But needless to say, getting back to the fight, in the 7th round, Arguello started turning the tide. Pryor was still circling and boxing. And more importantly, what ended up happening in that fight is that they started trading rounds. But let me get back to start the controversy. When it looked like Pryor was not going to be able to knock out Arguello in the first 2 rounds, between the 2nd and 3rd round, Panama Lewis asked for, just like on Legendary Nights, asked for a bottle for Pryor to drink from. And when the cornerman outside the ring handed him the bottle, he goes, no, not that one, the one that I mixed. And they pulled out a bottle that had a spray handle on it that they unscrewed, and it was a little bit darker than the other bottles. Some people called it a black bottle. It wasn't black, it was opaque. And they gave Pryor a drink out of it. Now, between the 2nd and 3rd rounds, nothing really seemed different because Pryor was still forcing the action and basically Arguello was taking more than he was giving. So as the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, Arguello started finding the range. And he started finding the range with just epic combinations, like right hand to the body, same right hand up over the top. The one punch he never did get untracked was his left hook. And again, this is because and again, this goes back to that genetic line of demarcation where you've got this smaller, thinner guy, even though he's taller, throwing from inside his shoulders, and the broader, bigger fighter can see this and basically take a step back, take a step to the side. A lot of very good head movement was used by Aaron Pryor in this fight to duck under Arguello's punches. So basically the fight keeps continuing, and they swing back round and round. And understand, when I'm watching this fight as a 12-year-old kid, I've got it, almost every round scored for Pryor in my mind. I mean, the guy that's basically doing most of the punching, landing most of the punching, is winning the rounds. The 11th round is when people like my dad started getting excited that history was going to be made, because all of a sudden Arguello started finding the range with his vaunted right hand. And that's when if you've seen highlights, you've seen him basically come under with a heavy right hand to the body, and then the right overhand right to the head. And Pryor, knew enough to move away and get out of there. The punches didn't hurt Pryor, and I think it's not anything to do with anything illegitimate about the fight. I just think that Arguello moved up one weight class too many. We've seen this happen before. Most recently with his countryman, Chocolatito. And the 12th round, Pryor had a better round. I thought he won the round. And then came the 13th, where again, the action's, minimal, but back and forth. And most of us are sitting here watching this fight thinking, if Arguello gets him to the deep water, he's got him. Because he hadn't even been 12 complete rounds. He'd just been in the 12th round once. So the 12th round comes and goes, and that was a decent round for Pryor. And the 13th round, halfway through that round, is when Arguello lowered the boom. 1-2, flush on the chin. That's when Pryor's head went snapping back. But here's the deal. He wasn't as hurt as people like my dad thought he was, because if you watch the slow motion replay, the second that punch lands, Arguello tries to hit him with a left hook or a left uppercut, and Pryor ducks underneath it and then basically wheels away. The rest of the round was fought on even terms, in my opinion. Now, basically, we're thinking, and my dad was thinking, he's got him. He's going to get him. If not, because he didn't get him in the 13th round, he'd get him before the end. And in between the 13th and 14th round, as it's well documented, Panama Lewis once again asked for, give me the bottle, the one that I mixed. And Pryor drank from it. This is where people who are subscribed to the conspiracy theory get their ammunition, because Pryor had been sliding for the past 4 rounds in his energy, and all of a sudden jumps off his stool and comes out with renewed pep. Now, here's my thoughts on this. Pryor was using a strategy of, I've taken your best, I'm going to give you my best now. And it happened several times in the fight. So when the 14th round started, Arguello smelled blood and was slowly stalking Pryor. And Pryor started landing shots that were just, from the outside, that were insane. There was even a looping right hand that, it was like, even Barry Tompkins called it, this is like the wind-up, here it comes, and it still lands. And then Pryor starts throwing combinations at him like he did earlier in the fight. And one right hand got Arguello's legs to buckle, and he went reeling back to the ropes. And as most of you know, Pryor administered one of the most ferocious finishes to a fight where Arguello didn't go down. When the fight ended, and it was probably close to midnight Eastern Standard Time or after, I almost sat in shock as a 12-year-old thinking, that was the result I was not expecting to see, even though I wanted Pryor to win the fight. I was tolling off round after round after round. He's going to win a decision, round after round after round. Just stay away from him. My dad, much to my chagrin at the time, was devastated. And I'm sure hundreds of thousands of Arguello fans around the world were devastated. Here's the deal, because, the thought was the wrong guy won the fight. Here's the deal. In the post-fight, it's been well documented, the Miami Boxing Commission, which I didn't even know there was one, I thought it was the Florida State Athletic Commission, failed to make anybody take post-fight urine analysis, and immediately the conspiracies flew. What most people don't know about that night, or don't remember, is that Alexis Arguello and Aaron Pryor wasn't the last fight. Roberto Duran refused to play second fiddle to Alexis Arguello or Aaron Pryor. And his career was in the doldrums at that time. And he was going to be the main event, the last fight of the night. And he fought with the stadium empty against a guy named Jimmy Batten, in which he won a 10-round decision. Arguello was never the same again. Pryor was never the same again after that fight. This was a place in time where what happened with Julio Cesar Chavez and Meldrick Taylor 7.5 years later was happening on a regular basis at this time. Because in a couple of weeks, I'm going to chronicle, well, in the next day and a couple of weeks, I'm going to chronicle a couple of more dates in history. And these fights changed the course of boxing. The thing with this fight is that, you know, I'm a proponent of 15-round fights. This fight is quintessential to why championship fights between champions need to be 15 rounds. Because in a 15-round fight, you can have two major swings in momentum. The first several rounds were Pryor's, no doubt about it. The middle of the fight was Arguello's, and then the momentum swung back to Pryor. That doesn't happen in 12-round fights. You have one, and let's use one of you guys mentioned about in the rematch theory I had. Jermaine Taylor versus Bernard Hopkins. Carbon copies. Taylor wins the first 5, 6, 7 rounds, then holds on for dear life as Hopkins comes on strong to try to knock him out. That's the way 12-round fights work. You very rarely have a 12-round fight where one guy comes out, like Sugar Ray Leonard, dances circles around Marvin Hagler, then Hagler comes back, and then Leonard comes back. That doesn't happen. It's basically one fighter's fight the whole way through, or one fighter's fight until a boxer's fight until the other one catches up with them, and there's only one change in momentum. The difference between this fight and the fights of today is that this fight was a marathon, a brutal marathon. The fights of today are like middle distance Olympic track and field runs, a 5,000K, a 10,000K race. They're long, they're arduous, don't get me wrong. 12-round fights are. The 15-round fights separate the cream from the rest. It's the cream of the crop. The cream rises in those last 3 rounds. And this was a perfect example because Arguello gave his absolute best. And getting back to that 13th round, when that punch landed on Pryor, it snapped his head back, you know what my dad said? That punch should have broke a 2x4. Now, I don't know if that... I mean, I'm thinking about that in the terms of, me hurting my hands on 2x4s. Maybe he was right. And Sugar Ray Leonard said, when he hits people with that right hand, most of the time they go down. But keep this in context. Pryor's arms were bigger. Shoulders were bigger. His legs were bigger. His chest expanded was bigger. His head looked like it was bigger than Arguello's. Physically. So all of this firepower that Arguello had was rendered useless against the bigger man. And this was one of the things I was taught also earlier on, is that a good big man will always beat a great little man. But when a great big man fights another great little man, you have epic fireworks, which we're going to see in 2 weeks also. And this is what I want to leave this with this date in history, because this fight is the quintessential, is what was right about boxing, what was good about boxing, what was, everything we want it to be. Now, most of you think I hold everything in standard to this fight. That's not necessarily the case. I just want the fights now, whether it's Triple G against Golovkin, Triple G, Golovkin versus Canelo, I'm sorry, to at least act like these guys. Fight for something other than money. Can you do that? The UFC does it week in, week out, month in and month out. And they just came off one of the biggest, most successful cards they had, with 3 titles changed hands. That's all I'm going to say about this, because, like I said, and getting back to why this fight has haunted me, I wanted Pryor to win the fight. He won the fight. I felt really bad for my dad after this fight and all of the Arguello fans, because I didn't realize how hard it was to do what Arguello had done and to try to win 4 titles in 4 different weight divisions. Today winning a title is like going to the store and buying a lollipop. It's set the fight up and we'll make it work. And that started just only 5, 6 years later when Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns started collecting belts and fighting, the James Kinchens of the world for Hearns, and Leonard fighting. Somehow Leonard comes out, beats Hagler, to win his third world title, takes off a year and a half, and then comes out of retirement to fight Donnie Lalonde for Lalonde's WBC 175-pound title. And somehow they've created this vacant WBC super middleweight title, and the fights for both titles somehow. So Leonard's won 5 titles now in 5 different weight classes. Which, even when it's happening, we're looking at each other going, that's a bunch of BS. But here nor there, again, the money was starting to pour in at that time. That's going to do it for this day in boxing, November 12th, 35 years ago today, 1982. Thanks, everybody.